Okay, and welcome to a very quick tutorial for Helicopter Gunship D.E.X. I'm Jim from Jimmy Arcade, and I'm going to be taking you through how we control this game with nothing more than a trusty Xbox 360 controller. Now the game has been optimised to be played with the control pad, but you can rebind your controls, so if you want to fly the helicopters with a flight stick or a HOTAS setup, then you can. There is a little bit of a caveat with that in the fact that you'll still be limited to using the sensor of interest or screen of interest system that I've developed to expand the number of buttons on the control pad, but it is fairly close to a real world implementation, so hopefully it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But I'm going to take you through that now. So first of all, I'll just get this helicopter up into the hover and get it to about 30 or 40 meters, I think. Let's go to 40 meters up. Perfect, there we go. So down the right hand side of the screen we have our targeting pod multifunction display system there. And around the edges of the display are buttons, and they're labelled up, down, left, right, X, A, Y and B. And obviously they correspond to the D-pad on the joypad and also the X, A, Y and B buttons. So I can interact with the targeting pod through the pad and move the targeting camera around using the D-pad controls. I can also change the camera mode, zoom in, lock on and change my weapons, which is all great. So I've got 8 buttons there. But 8 buttons really isn't enough to access all the systems of a modern attack helicopter. So we have a modifier button system as well. And now by default these are mapped to the shoulder button, so I have modifier 1 on the left shoulder button and modifier 2 on the right shoulder button. And if I press modifier 1 and hold it down, then the buttons on the multifunction display also change to reflect that they have a new function. So by pressing up on the D-pad, instead of moving the targeting pod, it now increases the size of the screen. And I can keep cycling through that, and I'll shrink down and go back to normal. I can also press down to reset the pod back to its forward position, and I can activate the helmet mounted sight system from here as well. Now, I won't do that just yet, because that requires a whole video tutorial in itself. So next I can press modifier 2, and I get access to flares and chaff and night vision goggles. And if I hold down both modifier buttons, then I get another 8 buttons as well. Now these are blank, purely because I haven't needed them yet, but they are obviously there for future functions. So there, if you're keeping track, you'll see that I have now 32 buttons available to me on the control pad, which is fantastic. That's much more like it. However, we really need more buttons because you can never have enough buttons, and I think having access to all controls in a helicopter is a really great thing. So if I now use the forward and back buttons on the control pad to switch across to the left hand side of the screen, you can see that now those buttons have now moved across. That means that I'm now looking at that screen, and that is my screen of interest. And you can see why now I prefer screen of interest rather than the sensor of interest, because we're dealing with screens, we're dealing with multifunction display screens rather than sensors themselves. So a screen of interest makes far more sense in my head. So if I now cycle through to the radar screen, I can now interact with that with using the buttons on the control pad, and you'll see that now a few of them have different functions. So up, down, left, right now controls the radar targeting cursor, while the X, A, Y and B actually have functions specific to the radar screen. So I can change the range, I can change this target priority for the radar filter, I can lock on, I can change the weapon. Now if I hold down modifier button 1, it means I can now turn the radar on by toggling the transmit button. And I can also press up to cycle through the multifunction display screen sizes. Now the reason we map the radar toggle button to the modifier 1 page is so you don't accidentally activate it when you're flying along. A lot of units will have passive radar detection, so the last thing you want to do is accidentally switch that on when you wanted to do something else. So that's why we put it on the modifier button page, because it's much less likely you're going to accidentally press a modifier and transmit rather than just having a single transmit button, so that's why it's there. And we have Modifier 2, will give us the night vision goggles again, and holding both modifiers gives the blank page again, ready for future functions. And that's basically it. We can cycle across again, and it's a similar setup for the mission support. We don't have any buttons available initially, but pressing and holding our modifier 1 will bring up the buttons for calling in mission support 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, we do that because we don't want to be bringing in mission support unless we really want to. And that really is how the screen of interest and the modifier button system works. And those who want to use a HOTAS system, you can, but you will need to bind those modifier buttons, and you will need to bind buttons that correspond to the joypad buttons, and then you'll be able to access everything just like the joypad does. Having said that, I will be adding some direct access buttons, and these will be buttons that, as the name suggests, will be able to access systems directly without having to go through the screen of interest system. So things like being able to turn your radar on and off would probably be quite useful to be able to do that from any page. So for those who have HOTAS setups with lots of buttons, I will be adding these direct access buttons in the future. They won't be there for the initial early access, but they will be coming quite quickly as they are quite easy to set up. And that's really all I wanted to show you, was just how we get around the limitations of a joypad, and how there really is no drawback to using a joypad at all. You get access to exactly the same control systems as anyone else. So there we go, that's that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was informative, and I hope you'll join me for the next tutorial on the Helicopter Gunship D.E.X.